This meant that something even more powerful than two swamp elementals had arrived. The Lizardmen scanned the area with naked confusion and fear. The moment they laid eyes on the lone undead in the distance, it loosed another magical attack from its hand. The fireball was about as big as a human S-head. It followed a straight path through the air and crashed into the Lizardmen on the front lines. Usually, throwing water on fire would put it out. Phenomena brought about by the laws of magic, even such everyday phenomena, were different. The moment the fireball hit the water, the area went up in flames as if the swamp were a hard floor. The expanding conflagration engulfed several Lizardmen and then disappeared. It was an illusion. The flames vanished abruptly enough to make them doubt their sight, but the smell of burned flesh hanging in the air and the crumpled forms of Lizardmen on the ground were no illusions. The undead advanced slowly. His manner was so elegant that it seemed to overflow with arrogance. It was the gait of someone confident in their power. Should we make a decisive charge, like we did against the skeleton archers? While the Lizardmen mulled it over, another fireball went flying. It exploded, and the lives of the Lizardmen in the area were snuffed out instantaneously. This was truly overwhelming power. It was as if everything up until now had been a game. Yag! A war cry went up, an attempt to shake off the fear. The moment several Lizardmen prepared to charge, an icy voice echoed out, impossibly close. Fools, just a single word. The fireball burned up its victims before they could even cry out. The undead swayed, and the several hundred Lizardmen took a step back, forced by the difference between their own power and the truly powerful. "Let us get out of here," one of the head warriors, shouted in a quavering voice. "This enemy is different from the others. We don't stand a chance, obviously." It was coming at them on its own. The Lizardmen could feel the pressure on their skin like an overwhelming wind. "You guys go back and report to the chiefs and Zayusu. We'll buy you time." The fireball burst, and a few Lizardmen fell. "Run, and tell them." The 5 head warriors let the others retreat to the village. They judged the distance between them and the enemy. They also considered the area of effect of the exploding fireballs. Basically, they wanted at least one of them to reach the enemy. They would face death for this objective. They exchanged looks from their spaced-out positions and set off sprinting. The distance was around 100 yards. It was 100 despair-inducing yards, but they still advanced. Even if they were defeated on their way, at least they would leave behind some intelligence for Zayusu and the chiefs. These chiefs were surely watching behind them. The Lizardmen who had pressed forward now ran home, scattering like baby spiders. Zayusu watched calmly. He'd been paying attention. Ever since the immensely powerful enemy appeared, the undead that sowed fiery death. Its movements were different from the unintelligent enemies they'd faced so far. This was probably the commander. When it reached an estimated 100 yards from the Lizardmen, it intercepted them with fireball area of effect attacks. The head warriors who had attempted a 5-pronged charge were all burned to death on their way. "It looks like we ray up." Zayusu nodded at Zenbel. Crush also indicated her agreement. Now they might be the ones to die, but they had to throw themselves into the fray. "Yeah, no doubt about it, this is where we come in. That kind of power, there is a very good chance this is the Great One's right-hand man, the commander of this army. Even if it is not, it must be their trump card. Yeah, there is no way they'd be able to control multiple undead of that strength. But how should we approach it? It is too far away." Zayusu racked his brain to answer Crush's question. They were fighting to die, so they needed a plan. Zayusu and Zenbel couldn't fight at a distance. They had to make it a close-quarters fight. The problem was that 100 yards. They were certainly capable of withstanding a fireball or two, but they would face more than 1 or 2 by the time they reached the enemy. The fight would begin in earnest only once they did. It wasn't hard to see that if they faced that inferno head-on in their advance, they'd be overpowered in the end. That distance is a real bummer. Yeah, it sure is. I never would have thought 100 yards could feel so far. They discussed how to reach the undead without any injuries, or at least without too many. What if we swam under the water? Even with priest powers, it'd be pretty hard. If we could use invisibility, they could close the gap all at once if they could go invisible and use fly, but druids weren't able to acquire those spells. Then how about making shields and holding those in front of us while we get closer? It will take too long to make shields. We could just break some houses, no? Zenbel smiled wryly, knowing even as he suggested it that his idea was no good. These magical attacks resulted in blistering explosions. Even if they blocked one direction, the heat would find its way around. They didn't have time to build shields that would cover their entire bodies. Oh, that we could do what, Zayusu? Crush asked timidly, recoiling slightly. Zayusu wondered if she had seen the ruthlessness of his plan on his face, but he couldn't help it. His idea was one he wished he could reject. No, I just found a shield. Iguvua nodded, content with the present circumstances. Things were going well. The two blood-meat hulks were still fighting, but he was advancing on the village with no problems. The Lizardmen had seemed ready to charge a couple of times, but once he showed them his power, they seemed to realize how futile their resistance was. The 5-man charge had probably gotten the closest, but even then, 50 yards had been their limit. Iguvua walked silently forward, as if he were crossing a deserted wasteland. He didn't drop his guard against the Lizardmen, even as he sneered at how weak they were. There wasn't much distance left between him and the village that was his objective. Upon reaching the village, he intended to burn down the buildings with a rapid barrage of flames and kill all the Lizardmen. But surely the enemy would rather he didn't arrive. Then they needed to start counterattacking soon. When he looked toward the village, he saw he was correct. Oh, I see. He could see a single Hydra. It began walking toward him. If that was their trump card, laying it low with his overwhelming abilities would probably rob the Lizardmen of their remaining will to fight. Then it would be even easier for him to destroy the village. He checked his surroundings once and looked up into the sky to confirm there were no other enemies. Then he stopped and leisurely waited for the Hydra to enter his range. Right on the verge of being in range, it began to run, yes, at full speed. Fool, you think you can make it all the way over here with your slow feet? You are nothing but an animal. Sneering, he formed a fireball in his hand and shot it at the Hydra. It flew in a straight line, hitting its target directly. Flames of crimson hellfire blazed up, licking the Hydra's entire body. However, though it staggered, its feet didn't stop moving. It kept running, engulfed in flames. No, the flames extinguished after a moment, so that must have been an illusion. The Hydra's extraordinary willpower only made Iguvua feel like that was what he saw. Iguvua frowned in displeasure. The creature had withstood one of his attacks. That deeply hurt his pride. Did seem like the Hydra had a defensive spell cast on its body to reduce energy damage, but it wasn't a high-level spell that could completely nullify his magic. Hydras have quick-acting healing abilities, but it shouldn't work against fire. Either way, if it's a magical beast, it must be overflowing with life force, so I guess it makes sense it could withstand one attack. Iguvua decided to comfort himself. Still, that didn't completely extinguish the flames of his rage. Iguvua was specially created by the Supreme One, Aints Ul Gaun. Taking his hit without dying was tantamount to insulting his master. Though inside he seethed with rage, Iguvua turned an ice-cold gaze on the Hydra that was earnestly running toward him. What a bother. He shot another fireball at the Hydra. Hellfire roasted the Hydra's entire body. Iguvua felt he could smell burning flesh even at this distance. He should have injured it enough to hesitate, even if it didn't die. But why don't you stop? Why are you still coming at me? Rororo ran. He was gigantic and the terrain was marshy, but he could sprint almost as fast as the Lizardmen. He made huge splashing noises as he went. His amber eyes were clouded from the heat. 2 of his 4 heads were already limp. Still, he ran on. Another fireball came flying and hit him. The fuel inside flared up. The flames licked his body. He felt throbbing pain like he was being punched over and over. His eyes dried up and the hot air burned his lungs. The ache from his full body burns and the searing pain from earlier that hadn't abated warned him he would die if he took another hit. Still, he ran, and ran. His feet never stopped, one in front of the other. His scales peeled off in the heat. Blood erupted as the skin beneath crinkled and curled up. Even then he didn't stop. If he were a witless beast, he would have naturally turned tail and fled. But Rororo didn't flee. Yes, Rororo was a magical beast. He was a Hydra. Some magical beasts were smarter than humans. Others were no more intelligent than any other animal. Rororo was more like the latter. It was mysterious a wonder that Rororo, with his animal brain on the verge of death, would continue to rush toward Iguvua. Iguvua was causing him pain. In fact, his enemy Iguvua couldn't understand it. He even considered that the beast might have been manipulated by some kind of magic. But that wasn't it. No, it was something else. Something Iguvua couldn't understand. Rororo, with no more intelligence than an animal, was running for his family. Rororo didn't know his parents' faces. Hydras didn't abandon their young. Babies lived with one parent until a certain age. They learned the skills to survive in nature. So why hadn't that been the case for Rororo? It was because he was deformed. Usually Hydras were born with 8 heads. As they aged, they grew more, sometimes as many as 12. But Rororo was born with just 4. So his parents abandoned him and took only his siblings. As a newborn Hydra without parents to care for him, regardless of how big he had the potential to grow in the unforgiving wild, it would only be a matter of time before his young life was extinguished. Except a male lizardman happened to pass by and pick him up. That was when Rororo gained a mother, father, and childhood friend all in one. Through the pain, with his numb mind, Rororo hazily recalled something he was always wondering. Why am I so big? Why do I have all these heads? He thought about this sometimes when he looked at his dad, his family, and he had an idea maybe these extra heads will fall off, and I'll grow arms and legs long like grass. And I'll look like dad, and then what would they do? Oh, we'll sleep together for the first time in so long. He'd gotten so big that they ended up sleeping in different places. That made him a little lonely. Flames filled Rororo's field of vision. They blew his thoughts away. Searing pain pummeled him again. He emitted a feeble cry. There was no place he didn't hurt terribly. A sense of peaceful warmth came from behind him, but it felt so weak to his scorched body. He endured the pain. It felt like being bashed with innumerable hammers. It hurt so much. It hurt too much. He couldn't think. His legs became frantic, unending spasms. They signaled him, telling him to stop. But did Rororo stop moving his legs? No, he did not. He advanced. Yes, his speed had slowed to a crawl. The flames burned his flesh and pulled at his muscles. It was impossible to run at his usual pace. Even taking a step forward was unbearable. It hurt to breathe. Just trying to inhale one more gasp of air was difficult. It was possible his lungs were burned. Still, his feet would not stop. Now only one of his heads was moving. The others were nothing more than dead weight. In his clouded field of vision, he could make out the undead conjuring another fireball in his hand. Rororo's instincts screamed at him he would die if this attack connected. But Rororo was not afraid. Forward, forward, he moved, single-mindedly forward. He'd been asked to do this by his mother, father, friend, so there was no way he could stop. He desperately advanced a few more steps, staggering slowly, his energy spent, when the undead loosed the crimson flames through the sky toward him. They would burn up the rest of Rororo's life. It was undeniable. In other words, death, the end of everything. Except that male was here. Would he let this happen? This absurdity? Not in a million years. Icy burst. Zayusu jumped out from behind Rororo and, running parallel to him, swung frost pain at the same time he shouted. A wall of white frost appeared in front of Rororo, as if the air itself had frozen starting from the tip of Zayusu's sword. It was frigid, a wintry torrent brought forth by frost pain. This was one of the magical sword's abilities, a special move that could be used only 3 times per day, Icy Burst. It could chill everything in the area and cause massive damage. The wall that Zayusu created blocked the fireball as if it had physical strength. A duel of fire and a wall of cold air magical logic made it appropriate that these two should clash. Impact. The fierce battle between flame and frost began. The two devoured each other like cannibal snakes of red and white. After an instant of equilibrium, they both faded. The undead was shocked and visibly panicked. That was the most appropriate attitude to have after his magic vanished. There was still some distance between Zayusu and Iguvua, but they could now make out each other's facial expressions and movements. Rororo's desperate march had brought the 3 lizardmen this far across the seemingly impossible distance unscathed. Rororo Zayusu got choked up for a moment. Of all the countless things that came to mind, he chose one that was extremely concise and pure. Thank you. With that shout, Zayusu ran forward without turning to look back at Rororo. Crush and Zenbal followed immediately after. A nearly fainting voice replied a cheer for his family. Iguvua's eyes widened. His fireball had been negated. He expressed his disbelief in words. This can be. He cast another spell. Of course, it was fireball. He didn't want to admit that the one who had erased his spell was the lizardman currently charging his way. the fireball raced toward the three lizardmen. One out in front swung his sword and created an icy wall to repel it. Both spells disappeared. Yes, it was the same thing that had happened before. He heard the lizardman shout, "Shoot as many as you want. I'll erase them all." Iguvia clicked his tongue in annoyance. He was created by the Supreme One, Lord Aints. How can this reptile scum block my magic? He frantically calmed his mind, seething with rage. There was an extremely good chance that Fireball wouldn't work against them anymore. But the fact that they had approached by hiding behind the Hydra meant there had to be some kind of limit on how many times that spell could be used. He could use it 10 times perhaps. Maybe each use consumed some of his health, so as long as he healed, he could use it an infinite amount of times. How should he deal with this? He wanted to find out if what the lizardman said was true, if possible. Iguvia could still shoot plenty of fireballs, but he couldn't tell if the lizardman was bluffing. They were only 40 yards apart. Also, as far as he could tell, the approaching lizardmen were warriors. As a caster, he didn't want a close-quarters fight. That was why he couldn't use Fireball. He wasn't foolish enough to try and see how many more they could block under these circumstances. If they hadn't been behind the Hydra, if they weren't so close, he might have experimented. But the pesky Hydra had ruined his chances for that. "You damned Hydra!" Iguvia spat and decided on his next move. How about this? Luckily for him, everyone was in a straight line. He pointed a finger at the three rapidly approaching lizardmen. Shock sparked around it. "Take this and taste my thundering wrath." Lightning, white lightning streaked across space. Even at a distance, he could see the white light coming from Iguvia's hand. Lightning, Frost Pain's icy burst could block chill and fire attacks, but Zayusu had never tried using it against lightning. He wasn't sure if the sword could block it. Should they take the risk? Or was it better to disperse, make themselves less of a target, and limit the number of injuries? Zayusu tensed the hand that held Frost Pain. The air felt like it was buzzing with electricity, proof that the shock was on its way. "Leave this to me." Before Zayusu could make a decision, Zenbul rushed out in front with a shout. At almost the same time, the spell was cast. Lightning, Yag, massive resistance. Right at the moment the lightning flowed into Zenbul's body, he flexed his muscles. As a result, the bolt that normally would have passed through to the others scattered. Massive resistance, it was a monk ability. By radiating Kai from his entire body for a moment, the user could reduce incoming magic damage. Zenbul had learned this on the journey he took, after being defeated by Frost Pain's special attack, Icy Burst. It worked on any damaging spell, whether it was an area of effect spell or another kind. Cries of surprise went up on both sides, but Crush and Zayusu, who believed in their friend, were only mildly surprised. They took advantage of the undead's shock to invade his space. "I see," thought Zayusu as he ran. If Zenbul had used Icy Burst back when they'd been fighting one-on-one, he probably would have blocked it using this move. He would have defeated him in the opening created. That was why he invited him to use it. "Haha, this is a cinch." Zayusu's expression softened when he heard Zenbul sounding so confident. But an instant later, he tensed up again. He realized there was a hint of pain mixed into his voice. If a male as strong as Zenbul wasn't able to bite back the pain, the damage must have been pretty significant. And Zenbul wasn't the type who would agree to the plan of having Rororo run out in front if his move defended him perfectly. Zayusu stared ahead. They were only 20 yards away. It had been a long way, but this was all that was left. As the party pressed in on him, Iguvia concluded they were powerful opponents. He had to hand it to any ability that could block his magic. Of course, he still had other methods of attack, but he had to think about defense too. "A nice sacrifice, most suitable for showing them how mighty I am." Iguvia grinned and cast a spell. Summon 4th-tier undead. The marsh belched, and 4 skeletons armed with round shields and scimitars stood up to protect him. They were skeleton warriors, undead so strong they couldn't even be compared to regular skeletons. There were other undead he could have summoned, but he chose skeletal warriors to elude chill attacks. Iguvia and all bony skeletons had perfect resistance to chill. Protected by his bodyguards, Iguvia watched the party's approach with contempt. It was the attitude of a champion awaiting contenders. Eventually the distance between them closed. Just 10 yards remained, that was all. Zayusu made sure the undead wasn't going to attack. He looked over his shoulder at the distance they traveled. Running 100 yards was nothing, but this was a no-man's land with nowhere to hide. Rororo, Frostpain, Zenbel, and Crush. If any one of those elements had been missing, it would have been impossible. It would have been an uncrossable distance. Now it was gone. He could close the remaining gap by reaching out his hand. They'd been able to overcome it. He felt a little relieved seeing Rororo being carried back to the Lizardmen village. Then he scolded his buoyant heart and glared at the undead. It was a horrible being. Zayusu frankly acknowledged that. If he hadn't encountered it in this situation and instead caught sight of it at a distance, he probably would have chosen to run away as fast as he could.